the world is something that we could have never imagined. The more that we get to know things in science and in psychology, or all the different things that about reality, it's so weird. It's so incredible. But the most incredible thing of all, the most profound mystery that we can ever really experience is consciousness. It's the mystery that beholds all other mysteries. And that's why it's the ultimate mystery. And so, as we begin to really get into our personal joy, our depth of our garden, our own personal Eden of joy, there's a domain of it's a domain of our imagination, but it's not an imagination that's merely fantastical. There's something very real to it. More real than, or just as real as anything can be. Because if our perceptions and our experience of ourselves and other people, if that's not real, then nothing is. And yet that's the thing that exists below consciousness. It's the thing that really gives any experience its definition. It's fundamentally an experience of ourselves. And so you can call it imagination, you can call it all sorts of different things. But it's a domain that we aren't addressing in our society, and we haven't for some time. And I fear that we've gone so long not embracing the real mystery of being and embracing it. And that's part of this whole mental health crisis, is that there's a whole part of our constitution, of our individual, of our makeup, of being a human, that we're neglecting and is being malnourished. You know, there's times where you can feel your imagination hyperextending yourself from the present moment, and you're aware of you're slightly aware of your loss of peace, your emotional dysregulation, a lot of things that are that weaken you and weaken your frequency of being. What I think we fail to realize is that awareness is our ability to really keep ourselves in a place of strength and not associating ourselves with weakness or defining ourselves with weakness. There's a certain disciplining of our mind and our emotions that, I mean, it is difficult. It's very difficult. But every great thing worth doing is going to be difficult. Let's put it in reverse. We know when our imagination actually works in a positive way, when it plans for a future, it has a hope, an expectation that isn't rooted in just wish fulfillment or wishful thinking, but actually sees a life that we want, that unconsciously puts such a demand on who you are and naturally pulls it out of you so that you become this animated version of a more full version of who you are, because it makes a demand on it. It's a piece of the puzzle, but we can't just rely on the unconscious triggering of our emotion. We have to do certain work and certain things that we have to find for ourselves, these different things, these different ways that we stay in our joy. We stay in a better understanding of who we are. Self-development is like the ultimate art form. And it's something I'm going to say again and again, is that all these things that we have to do in our life, they're things that we don't have to do. They're things that we get to do. I'm learning more and more just how much, like, as a man, assuming responsibility is a blessing. It's what really makes my life and makes who I am. It puts a demand on who I am. And that demand, there's force to that. There's pressure to that. But there's more pressure on the inside of me. And I have to exercise my ability to bring to people into different environments and circumstances what I have to give by assuming responsibility and by allowing myself to really extend myself from these ideas and these beliefs into different things. And assuming responsibility as a man is a place that I actually really, really do get satisfaction. I mean, you feel amazing. And, and that's just, we all have to find the ways that we engage the world where we don't feel like we're repressing who we are, but we're releasing who we are. And sometimes when there is subtle ways that we're just trying to live up to expectations or some sort of pressures and stuff, we feel trapped and we're not really releasing who we are. We're releasing a broken version of ourselves or honestly, I feel this way with music sometimes that, I'm when I get really clear in myself and get very present, all of a sudden I can perform in a way that is just, I'm in the front row, just be like, dude, this guy's awesome. And there's times where I'm the guy in the front row being like, this guy sucks. And I've had to learn that I have to actually embrace both of those people because they're sitting both on the front row. They're two versions of myself that they both have to become friends. And sometimes I need the negative demand. Sometimes I need the positive voice. And so even though I tend to be a person who I want positive motivations and stuff, there is a level of embracing positive negativity, constructive criticism, just using my own life, my own ability to embrace the way I can make myself aligned within myself to where I feel like I'm a more pure release of who I am. There's such a relationship to being that every moment of demand that I put on myself trying to understand things and live up to what I think is kind of an idealistic mentality, I guess, of my own spiritual growth, there's still at the root of it an acceptance of who I am that frees me up to really be the ultimate expression of who I am. And I've learned this is a experiential kind of revelation of myself. And I think we all have these different insights that are in store for us of really understanding really who we are. Like we think we know. And sometimes that's as much as we can get in the moment or in a phase or in a stage of our lives. But when you really grow in it, there's layers. There are dimensions and depth to who we are. And sometimes it's even difficult to grow. I know, man, I've really had kind of a rough time last few years just getting into a different place. And now I feel like I have such this vast labyrinth of different things to pull from that when I just start talking, all of a sudden I'm just going through like a playground of ideas and just have, I literally could probably talk into like, I could just forever. Because that's the thing is that eventually you find out that there's certain ideas and that reset your emotions. It resets your freshness. And so once you begin to wire yourself a certain way, you can actually drive yourself to the point of exhaustion, even though your mind is becoming strong and has become strong. And eventually you're just going past your limit, and just how we're designed is just made to, we have to get rest. And so at some point I have to be more mindful of my audience and be more mindful of, what you guys can actually digest at once. Not saying that, I'm this profound person, but I have a lot of like nuggets and a lot of things to think about. And I'd much rather you think about them, so that when I do go on and talk about other things and stuff, those are themes in your own life. Like these aren't just my ideas. All this comes back to, deep down, I believe that there's a common human experience. Yes, there's differences we have, but there's this deep path. That's a profound path that of deep value. That's almost like, do you ever have a book or a movie or a song or something that like you meet someone and they like the same thing, but it's kind of an obscure interest. It doesn't even have to be that obscure. It's just someone who you feel like gets it. There's a feeling of excitement about that sort of mutual consciousness, like something in us tells us this is important. This is, there's something special about that. There's almost a recognition. It's almost like consciousness looks at itself in those moments, and for a moment beholds the image of God that it was created in. And so I want to get into these things in a way that we really challenge ourselves to go into some deep, profound territory. And I'm going to use religious language because I think that's important. It's the strong enough, it's the strongest language that we have to articulate, I think, the frequency of the potency of these ideas. And I think anyone can appreciate them, even if you're not religious. I hope people that listen to this aren't just people that have or think they have agree with me on everything, because we all have our different agreements and disagreements, but it shouldn't matter, because this conversation, I hope, can be one that we're mutually exploring the depth of our experience of ourselves. I find this quest, I find this domain of profundity, if that's a real word. It's like profundity. I think I've heard it before in a movie somewhere. I find it in the New Testament, but curiously missing in modern religion. And so I have some radical ideas. I have some radical things, and I hope that you'll embrace. I don't know. I guess it's kind of punk rock. I have a sort of punk rock version of spirituality and religion that it's a little edgy, and I think it's good. And I feel like that's where you really get authentic conviction to beliefs. You're just not trying to get to the end of the story. I feel like that's the thing about a lot of religion, is that everyone has like this little system that's in place. No one's concerned about the story or the narrative. They just want to get to the end. And it's that's how I kind of see our doctrinal kind of obsession with right belief, is that everybody wants to have the formula right. Everyone wants to know what is right, what is wrong, and all these different things in place. And then, bam, that makes me a good person, or makes me, whatever. And it's much more sophisticated than that. Because if that's just the end, and we're not focused on the means, it doesn't matter how good these beliefs are. To me, that's kind of a structural belief. What's much better is a functional belief. So the thing is that if we're so obsessed about right belief, and all we're focused on is viewing the world in a duality of people that are for our beliefs or against our beliefs, we could become so distracted in that mindset. The evil of religion has been to simplify the soul, to think that its salvation comes in a mere organization of the mind that doesn't impact the function of who a person is. And so right belief, is important, but it can be a driver of us being so hyper focused on right belief that it doesn't actually change our actions or change the way that we view each other and feel existence, feel our own soul, essentially. And it's not until we actually can love ourselves and accept ourselves in a deep way where we find the overflow that is our love for our neighbor and love for each other. And so, to me, this conversation of our individuality as a place of deep, intimate mystery that goes into the domain of imagination even. And again, not as a domain of fantasy, but of a domain of hope. There is an imaginative, there is a fantastical quality to it. And we'll get more into that later on. Because again, I'm very reluctant to put arbitrary limits on ourselves and in our goal of what we want to accomplish in trying to tackle some of the deepest problems that we have. To me, this is the thing I'll leave you with. This is probably, if I could articulate my philosophy and put it all kind of in one sentence, it'd be this: if the mind could imagine reality in a way that was superior to how God created us, it would make the mind more superior than God. Therefore, at the root of all reality is a truth that is more potent and powerful than anything we can actually imagine and conceptualize in our most luxurious, fantastical imagination. Now, that's kind of a theory, but as I will get into the next episode, there are things that I've experienced that have pointed to this understanding. It's not something to kid around with, and I wouldn't tell you this if I was just blowing smoke. So I'm hoping to open up a lot of things and be very transparent with you, because I feel like the conversation demands this. I want to give you guys a lot of things to consider and think about, and I want to bring us to this really cool idea, this powerful idea that we can't out-imagine God. And for my non-religious people, I would phrase that in being that the depths of the human mind and human soul have in it mysteries that are reflected in cultures dating all the way back to history or prehistory, and regarding our spiritual nature. And although in our modern era we've lost the sense of understanding, I guess, our correct orientation towards the domain of religion or spirituality or faith or whatever, it's a fundamental instinct in us that I would say, even if you don't believe in a certain religion or a certain spiritual perspective, I think you should have a philosophy of the human mind that makes sense of it, to where you understand it, that you're able to give as much grace as the believer can. That just about anything that a religious person can offer or can with all of its virtue, all of its idealism, even if it's they live in dysfunction of that thing. I think that the only way we can prove our belief system to be correct is if we're able to live up to a higher level in our own belief system that we can borrow from from competing worldviews to make an ultimate worldview that doesn't that stands on the shoulders of what's come before. That's true progress. I think there's this idea sometimes that progress, we get to where we are now, and we're able to thumb our nose down at throughout history, that everybody who's believed something different, and that's completely hideously, I think, ignorant. Because at various times there's been insights into various different things that met certain needs, and that there's so many people that actually, in lots of ways, and there's a great argument you could be made that our intelligence has decreased and has gone so down below our even recognition of what it is, in comparison to older ways of looking at things and traditions that into various cultures that have naturally produced respect and honor and certain good, wholesome virtues. That now our understanding of many things are reduced to left brain logic, idealism, and there isn't really like a firm grasp on the depth of the human experience. And it's one thing that you can say about a lot of religions, is that there is this collective notion of something, and the paradox of it all is that, and I would say this is where I feel like, to me, I've heard it said that Buddhism is not really a religion, and for reasons that it's more of a philosophy. It's more of a I think very much there's a very similar argument that you could make towards Christianity, but for me, Christianity is to me, it's the ultimate universalism, because there's so many different things I can find Eastern influence, at least in the New Testament. There's when you get into the more modern belief structures and stuff, I think we've gotten away from a lot of the things, but I see in it so many different factors and different ways that things come into a kind of it's very fascinating how at a certain time a lot of ideas converged, and so I kind of feel like there's a Eastern and Western paradox within it, and I find that very exciting. But okay, I've gone on way too long. My voice is gone, and I'm talking like a nerd. All right, probably not going to use any of this. I heard Alan Watts give a lecture on how can we conceive of a universe that justifies all the evil that's within it. And I thought that was a very, very wise question to ask, because it puts a demand on our formulation of a worldview wherein we can harmonize our pain and the darkness that we see, not that we diminish it in a certain capacity, not to say that it's not happening, Not to say that it's not something we shouldn't be concerned about or worried about, or but you can only treat weakness with being strong yourself. In the midst of all this that I'm sharing with you guys, I want you to kind of have that in the back of your head, of formulating an idea of the universe, of reality, can justify the existence of evil. And what you'll find, I think, with that sort of question, it puts a demand on a larger scale conception of what this is. And I think ultimately in our own lives, we're going to confront various degrees of evil, various degrees of pain and misery and suffering and negativity. We have to train ourselves to stay within a framework that soberly knows and is aware of negativity and evil, and yet stays plugged into a notion that all of this is worthwhile, that all of this, and we have to kind of train ourselves to begin to stay in a certain positivity. And I don't want this to be something where you force a belief system, but I feel like our beliefs many times aren't things that we by force obtain, but things that form by us being simply open to new perspectives. And when someone is able to genuinely reflect their own perspectives and ways they view things, that causes us to have a variation of that in ourselves, but in our own way. And so take my music, that my inner music that I have in my soul, my own psychological and spiritual music, and maybe you can take a melody from it. You can take a beat and have it influence the music of your life.